It all started on a gray Tuesday morning. The kind of day where the sky looks tired, and even the air feels heavy. I bought a used car that day. It wasn't because I wanted something new or exciting, it was because my old car finally gave up. I wasn't chasing adventure or change. I just wanted something reliable to get me to work and back to my small apartment. The car was nothing special. A 2018 Honda Civic with about 65,000 miles. It looked clean, worked fine, and felt like a safe choice. But the strange thing was what I found inside. When I sat down and started the engine, I saw one saved address in the GPS system. It was labeled simply as home. I stared at it for a moment. I thought the last owner probably forgot to delete it. I almost removed it, but something inside stopped me. I didn't know why, but that tiny moment of curiosity changed everything in my life. At that time, I wasn't lost on a map. I knew where I lived, where I worked, and how to move from one place to another. But inside, I was completely lost. The kind of lost that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering what your life means. 2 years before that day, I had dropped out of grad school. I was studying English literature because that's what people like me did when they didn't know what else to do. But halfway through my second year, I looked around my classroom and felt nothing. No passion, no interest, no purpose. I was just there because I didn't know where else to be. So, I quit. After that, life became small. I got a job at a call center answering angry customer calls for $17 an hour. I lived alone in a small apartment. Every day felt the same. I went to work, came home, heated a frozen dinner, and tried to sleep. My friends were all moving forward. They were getting married, buying homes, traveling, posting pictures of their happy lives online. And I was just there, surviving. The week before I bought the Civic, my old Corolla finally died after 200,000 miles. I didn't have the money to buy a fancy car, so I found a small used car lot on the edge of town. The salesman was a tired man in his 50s, polite but distant. He showed me the car's report, told me it was an estate sale, and said, the previous owner took good care of it. Clean title. No accidents. The words, estate sale, stuck in my head, but I didn't think too much about them at the time. I test drove the car, it worked fine, and I bought it. That night, I parked it outside my apartment and felt like I had done something good for myself. But deep down, I still felt the same emptiness. Nothing had really changed. On Friday after work, I sat in my car before starting it. The parking lot was quiet, and the glow from the streetlights fell across the dashboard. My mind felt heavy after another long, miserable day at the call center. I started playing with the GPS settings, just to distract myself. That's when I saw it again, the saved address labeled home. I remember thinking how strange it was. Someone's entire idea of home was now sitting inside my car, waiting for me to press it. I could have ignored it, deleted it, and gone on with my boring weekend. But something made me stop. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that quiet ache inside me that wanted to feel something again. So, I decided that on Saturday morning, I would drive to that address and see where it led me. The next morning, the sky was clear. I got in my car, connected my phone, and followed the GPS. I thought it might lead to a house or maybe an apartment complex. But the route kept going farther out of town. The roads became smaller. The houses disappeared. I drove past pine trees, hills, and long stretches of empty road. After about 2 hours, the GPS said, "You have arrived at your destination." I looked around and realized there was nothing there but a small parking area carved into the side of a mountain. There was a wooden overlook with a single bench facing a wide, endless view. The mountains spread out in every direction. The valleys below were covered in green. It was peaceful, almost too quiet. And sitting on that bench was an old man. He looked like he was in his 70s, wearing a flannel jacket and a faded cap. He was staring out at the mountains like they were old friends. For a second, I thought maybe he was just another person stopping to enjoy the view. But when he turned his head and saw me, he smiled and said something that made my heart skip. "You came," he said, as if he had been waiting for me. I froze, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry," I said. "Do I know you?" The man shook his head gently. "No," he said. "But I know your car." His words made no sense at first. "My car?" I asked. He nodded slowly and pointed at the Honda Civic behind me. "That car belonged to my son, Michael Carver. He passed away 8 months ago." My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know. "I bought it from a dealership," I said softly. He smiled a sad, tired smile. That's how it was supposed to happen. Then he extended his hand. "I'm Thomas," he said. "Thomas Carver." I shook his hand. "Ben," I replied quietly. "Ben Turner." We stood there for a moment, surrounded by silence and wind. I didn't know what to say. I felt like I had walked into someone else's story. Thomas gestured to the bench. "Sit with me," he said kindly. "Let me tell you about my son." So, I sat down beside him, and he began to talk. His voice was soft but strong. "Michael was 32 when he died," he said. "He had lung cancer. Never smoked a day in his life. It just happened. By the time we found it, it had already spread. He fought for a year, but it wasn't enough." He paused, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "After his mother died when he was 12, it was just him and me. We were close, best friends even. This place," he said, waving his hand toward the overlook, "was our spot. We came here for the first time when he was 14. Just a random stop on a road trip. But he loved it, the quiet, the way the sunset hit the mountains, the stillness. We came back every year. We spread his mother's ashes down there, near those trees." He pointed toward the valley. His voice cracked for the first time, and I felt my chest tighten. "When Michael got sick," Thomas continued, "he told me he wanted to come here again. But he couldn't. The cancer made him too weak. So, he did something strange. He told me, 'Dad, I've saved this address in the car's GPS and labeled it home. Whoever buys this car next, if they're the right kind of person, they'll be curious enough to follow it. Be there for them. Tell them my story.'" I stared at him, completely speechless. "Why would he do that?" I finally asked. Thomas turned toward me and looked right into my eyes. "Because he believed everything happens for a reason. He thought the universe connects people when they need each other the most. He said that the person who follows the GPS will be someone who feels lost, just like he once did. He wanted me to be here for that person." His words sank into me like stones. I felt something shift inside, something between disbelief and awe. I had almost deleted that address. Almost. But I didn't. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees. I didn't know how to describe the feeling. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper, something like being seen. After a while, Thomas turned to me and asked, "So, Ben, why were you curious enough to come here?" I laughed softly. "Because my life is empty," I admitted. "I dropped out of grad school. I work at a job I hate. I feel stuck. I guess I just wanted to see something different for once." Thomas nodded like he already knew. "Michael was like that once," he said. "He finished college, took a job in insurance, and was miserable. Then one day, he took a photography class just for fun. He found what made him feel alive. He quit his job, bought a camera, and started traveling. He built a life doing what he loved. He used to tell me, 'Dad, most people live safe lives and call it happiness. But real happiness starts with curiosity.'" I looked at Thomas and felt something stir inside me. Curiosity. Maybe that was what had been missing from my life all along. "Maybe you're still searching for your thing," Thomas said gently. "You followed the GPS for no reason at all. That means something." His words stayed in my mind as we both turned to watch the sunset. The sky burned orange and pink. It was so beautiful I almost forgot to breathe. Thomas whispered, "Michael loved this time of day. Said it made everything feel honest." I nodded, unable to speak. For a long while, we just sat there in silence, two strangers connected by a dead man's memory. The sun slipped lower and lower, the light fading into gold, then gray. Then Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. He held it out to me with shaking hands. "Michael left this behind," he said. "He told me to give it to whoever followed the GPS." I stared at the envelope, the paper slightly wrinkled and worn, the name, "To whoever finds home," written in faded ink. My heart pounded as I took it. The air felt heavy again, just like that gray Tuesday. I didn't know what was inside, but something told me it would change everything. And as I opened the envelope and saw the first line written in Michael's handwriting, I realized this wasn't just a letter. It was the beginning of something I didn't even know I was looking for. The paper was old, folded neatly, the ink slightly smudged as if tears had fallen on it once. I took a deep breath and began to read. "To whoever is reading this," the letter started. "You bought my car, and you were curious enough to follow a GPS address to nowhere. That tells me something about you. You are searching. Maybe you don't know what for, but you are." I paused, my eyes already blurring. The handwriting wasn't perfect. Some letters leaned forward like they were trying to keep moving even as the writer was fading. I swallowed hard and kept reading. "I'm dying as I write this," it said. "I'm 32 years old, and I have maybe a month left. I've spent a lot of time thinking about life this year, about what matters and what doesn't. I've realized something simple: life isn't about having everything figured out. It's about being curious. It's about following small things that call to you, even when they don't make sense. That's how you find the moments that make life worth it." I felt my chest tighten as the words sank in. Each sentence sounded like he was speaking directly to me, through time, through loss, through the engine of a car I thought was just transportation. "If you followed the GPS," he continued, "that means you noticed something small and decided to see where it led. That means you're the kind of person who still believes there might be something waiting for you out there. That's rare. Don't lose it." I looked up from the letter. The sun had already disappeared behind the mountains. The sky was painted in deep purple and orange streaks. Thomas sat quietly beside me, his hands clasped, his eyes on the horizon. I didn't speak. I just kept reading. "My dad is probably sitting with you right now," the letter went on. "He's grieving. Losing a child isn't something you ever get over. Please talk to him. Listen to him. Let him tell you about our adventures. Let him tell you how we chased light across mountains, waited for perfect sunsets, and talked about everything and nothing. Then, go find your own adventures. They don't have to be big. They just have to make you feel alive. My hands shook as I reached the next paragraph. I've spent 10 years as a photographer, Michael wrote. I've seen glaciers, deserts, oceans, and cities. But my favorite moments weren't the big ones. They were small, watching my dad laugh when his coffee spilled, sitting in silence while the world turned gold, hearing rain hit the roof of our car. That's life. Small, quiet moments that mean everything if you're paying attention. I stopped, letting the words sink in. I had spent years ignoring small moments, rushing through life, waiting for something big to happen. Maybe that's why everything felt empty. I continued reading. You and I will never meet, the letter said. But you're finishing something for me. You're sitting in the place I loved most, beside the man I loved most, watching the sunset I wanted to see one last time. Thank you for that. Thank you for being curious. Thank you for following something simple and turning it into connection. Don't wait until you're dying to realize that the point of life is just to live it. My throat tightened. I could barely see the words anymore. Follow curiosity, the last lines read. Say yes to small things. Don't worry about the right path. There isn't one. There's only the path you're on, and whether you're paying attention. Take care of yourself. Take care of my dad. Michael Carver. By the time I reached the end, my face was wet. Thomas's eyes glistened too, though he didn't speak. We sat there, two men from different lives, joined by one man's dying wish. The air was cool now, and the stars were beginning to show. I folded the letter carefully and handed it back to Thomas, but he shook his head. Keep it, he said softly. He wanted it to be yours now. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and held the envelope close like it was something fragile and sacred. The drive back that night felt different. The world looked softer somehow. Streetlights looked warmer. The road didn't feel endless anymore. For the first time in years, I didn't feel numb. I felt alive. That week, I kept thinking about the letter. I carried it in my jacket pocket everywhere I went. At work, when customers yelled, I'd touch it without thinking, just to remind myself that somewhere out there, meaning existed. One night, I reread it again, tracing the shaky lines of Michael's handwriting. Something inside me stirred, a quiet voice whispering that maybe it was time to stop surviving and start living. On Saturday, I drove back to the Overlook. Thomas was already there, sitting on the same bench, looking at the same horizon. He smiled when he saw me. I hoped you'd come back, he said. I told Michael I would wait as long as it took. I sat beside him and handed him a coffee I'd picked up on the way. You keep your promises, I said. He nodded. So did he. We talked for hours that day. He told me about Michael's adventures, about how he hiked through storms to photograph lightning, how he once sold everything he owned to travel for a year, how he always said yes to things that scared him. He was never afraid to start over, Thomas said. Even when he had nothing, he believed life would find a way. I listened quietly, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. I told Thomas about my own life, about how I'd lost interest in everything, how I felt invisible, how the world felt gray. He didn't judge me. He just said, "You came here, didn't you? That's something." Most people never follow their curiosity. They just stay where they are and call it living. After that day, I kept coming back every Saturday. Thomas and I became unlikely friends. He told stories, I listened. Sometimes we sat in silence, just watching the world. I started to notice small things again, how the light changed through the trees, how the air smelled before it rained, how peaceful it felt to just exist without a goal. One afternoon, Thomas brought an old photo album. It was filled with Michael's pictures, mountains, cities, faces of strangers. Each photo seemed alive, like it carried his spirit. He saw beauty everywhere, Thomas said, his voice breaking. Even in sadness. I looked at a photo of a cracked road after rain, the reflection of the sky shining in puddles. He found meaning in what others ignored, I said. Thomas smiled faintly. Exactly. Over time, I realized those Saturdays were changing me. I started noticing colors again, emotions again. I laughed more. I even started thinking about trying new things. One day, I told Thomas, I've been thinking about taking a photography class. I don't know if I'll be any good, but I'm curious. He smiled wide, really smiled, and said, then do it. Don't worry about being good. Michael would tell you the same thing, just start. So, I did. I signed up for a beginner class at the community college. The first night, I was nervous, but when I held the camera and looked through the lens, something inside me clicked. For the first time in years, I felt focused. Alive. The world looked different when I looked through that small frame. Every shadow, every bit of light mattered. It wasn't just taking pictures, it was seeing again. Week by week, I started practicing. I photographed streets, trees, faces, sunsets. Sometimes I'd drive back to the overlook after class and try to capture the same view Michael once loved. The first few shots were terrible, but I didn't care. It wasn't about perfection. It was about being curious. Thomas started joining me on Sundays too. We'd compare photos, laugh, and talk about life. I showed him my favorite one, the sun breaking through fog right above the valley. He stared at it for a long time, his eyes wet. Michael would have loved that one, he said. You're seeing the world the way he did. I smiled, but deep inside I felt something shift, like I was slowly becoming a part of their story. 4 months later, I did something I never thought I'd do. I quit my call center job. It terrified me. I didn't have a clear plan, but I couldn't go back to that empty feeling. I found a part-time job at a local bookstore instead. The pay was less, but I didn't mind. The place smelled like paper and quiet dreams. I felt peaceful there. That's where I met Gabby. She came in one afternoon looking for a photography book. I was shelving New Arrivals when she asked, "Do you know if this author talks about light exposure?" I turned and recognized the book instantly. It was the same one I'd just finished. Yeah, I said, smiling for the first time that day. That book changed how I see sunsets. She laughed softly. You're a photographer? A student, I admitted. But obsessed. We talked for 20 minutes about photography, about books, about how she was a graphic designer trying to understand real-world lighting. Before she left, she smiled and said, "If you know any good places to practice, let me know." I wanted to say the Overlook, but I didn't yet. That place still felt sacred, like a promise. Weeks passed. She came back every Thursday. We'd talk a little more each time. Eventually, I told her about Thomas, about Michael, about the GPS. She listened quietly, her eyes soft. That's beautiful, she whispered. You have to show me someday. And I did. One Sunday, months after we met, I finally took her to the Overlook. The moment she saw it, she gasped. It's like stepping into a painting, she said. We sat on the bench, the same one where I met Thomas, and watched the sunset together. I told her everything. When I finished, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for sharing this. You followed something small and found something huge." I smiled, realizing she was right. As the weeks passed, Gabby and I grew closer. Thomas noticed. "She makes you braver," he said one evening. "Michael would like her." I laughed. "She makes me want to take better pictures." Thomas chuckled. "That's the same thing." The three of us started spending weekends together, taking photos, cooking, talking. The emptiness I once carried had turned into warmth. Every time I looked at the car, I thought of Michael and how one small act of curiosity connected all of us. A year after the first time I drove up that mountain, Thomas invited me to his house for dinner. On the wall was a framed picture, me and him sitting on the bench, sunset glowing behind us. "That's my favorite," he said. "It feels like Michael's still here." I nodded. "He is. In every picture, every sunset." That night, as I left, Thomas handed me a small box. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it when you get home," he said with a wink. When I did, I found Michael's old camera inside, the one he'd used for most of his travels. There was a note taped to it in Thomas's handwriting, "For Ben. Keep following your curiosity." I sat there in silence, holding the camera, feeling the weight of everything that had led me here: a broken car, a random address, a grieving father, a dead man's letter. It all led to this moment. I picked up the camera and looked through the viewfinder. The world felt clear. I realized that life didn't change because of big plans, it changed because of small choices, like not deleting a GPS address. And as I stood by my window, holding that camera and thinking about the letter that started it all, I felt something rising inside me again, that same quiet pull, that same whisper of curiosity, telling me to keep going, to keep searching, because maybe the story wasn't over yet. That thought kept echoing inside my head like a heartbeat that refused to fade. Every day I woke up thinking about the letter, about Michael, about Thomas waiting on that bench. I started carrying Michael's old camera everywhere. The weight of it in my hands reminded me that small choices could change everything. One Saturday morning, I drove back to the overlook before sunrise. The road was quiet, the air cool, and fog curled around the trees like smoke. When I parked, Thomas was already there, sitting in his usual spot with 2 cups of coffee. "You beat the sun again," he said with a smile. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Something about this place feels like home now." He nodded. "It has that effect. That's why Michael named it home." We watched as the first light touched the mountains, soft and golden. I lifted the camera and took a picture. The click of the shutter sounded like a promise. Thomas looked at me. "You've got his eye," he said. "You see light the way he did." I didn't answer. I just kept taking pictures until the sun was high and the fog disappeared. That day, something changed quietly inside me. I realized I wasn't visiting anymore. I was belonging. The weeks turned into months. Life settled into a rhythm: work at the bookstore, photography classes in the evenings, weekends at the overlook. Gabby became part of it too. She fit in naturally, her laughter filling the quiet spaces that once felt heavy. She and Thomas would argue playfully about the best coffee beans, about whether mountains looked better in morning light or at sunset. Watching them made me feel like family didn't have to be something you were born into, it could also be something you found. One Saturday, after a long hike down the trail near the overlook, Thomas stopped to catch his breath. "You all right?" I asked. He waved it off. "Just getting old," he said, smiling, but there was a strain behind it. He changed the subject quickly. asking about my next class project, and I didn't push. But that evening, when we sat on the bench, he was quieter than usual. "You ever think about what happens when people leave?" he asked suddenly. "All the time," I said. "I used to think leaving meant it was over, but now I'm not so sure." He nodded slowly. "Good. Because maybe it isn't." The way he said it sent a chill through me, though the air was warm. He looked at me and smiled. "Promise me something, Ben. No matter what happens, keep coming here. Keep taking pictures. Keep living." I promised, even though I didn't understand why he asked. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about his words. I looked at the pictures I'd taken that day, Thomas laughing, Gabby tying her hair, sunlight spilling through the branches. They looked alive. Real. Beautiful. I printed a few and framed one for him, planning to give it the next week. But when Saturday came, Thomas wasn't there. His truck wasn't in the lot. I waited an hour, then another. I told myself maybe he was running late. The next weekend, still no sign of him. Worry began to grow like a shadow. I drove to the small town where he lived, the one he'd mentioned once. I found his address, a little white house with a faded blue porch. A neighbor saw me standing there and came over. "You looking for Thomas?" she asked. I nodded. Her face softened. "He's at the hospital. Had a heart attack 2 nights ago. His daughter's with him." My heart sank. "Can I see him?" I asked. She gave me the room number. When I walked into the hospital room, Thomas looked smaller than I remembered. Tubes, machines, soft beeping. But his eyes lit up when he saw me. "You came," he whispered, the same words he'd said the first day we met. "Of course I came," I said, pulling a chair closer. "You scared me." He smiled weakly. "Guess Michael's trying to make me join him early." I shook my head. "Not yet. He can wait." He laughed softly, then coughed. "Ben," he said after a moment, "I want you to have something." He motioned toward the small table beside the bed. There was a worn notebook there. I picked it up. "It's my journal," he said. "Every Saturday since Michael died, I wrote something here. After you came, I kept writing about you too. About how you changed everything." My throat tightened. "Thomas, no," he interrupted gently. "Just listen. You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever feel again, purpose. You kept my promise alive. Whatever happens, promise me you'll keep it going." I nodded, my eyes burning. "I will. I swear I will." He smiled again, satisfied, and closed his eyes to rest. That night, I sat in the hospital parking lot reading his journal. The entries were simple: dates, weather, small moments. But they painted a picture of a man holding on to love and grief with both hands. In one entry, after our first meeting, he wrote, "The boy who followed the GPS reminds me of Michael before he found his camera. Lost, but curious. Maybe this is how healing works, 2 broken lives meeting at the right time." I closed the book and cried right there in my car. It wasn't loud or dramatic. Just quiet tears that wouldn't stop. The next few days, I visited every evening after work. Gabby came with me sometimes. She brought flowers, told stories, made Thomas laugh. But each day, he seemed a little weaker. One evening, as I was leaving, he held my hand and said, "Ben, when I go, promise me something else." "Anything," I said. "Don't stop following curiosity. Don't stop living. And take care of her," he said, nodding toward Gabby, who was standing in the doorway smiling. "She's special. She's your light." I squeezed his hand and whispered, "I promise." A week later, Thomas was gone. Peacefully, the nurse said. I didn't speak for a long time. The funeral was small, quiet, just close friends and a few of Michael's old colleagues. I stood beside Gabby, holding the framed photograph I'd meant to give him. After everyone left, I drove up to the overlook alone. The air felt heavy, and the wind carried a familiar sadness. I sat on our bench, the same spot where everything had started, and pulled out the letter and the journal. The bench felt colder without him there. I opened the notebook to the last page. His final entry was written just days before he passed. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But if you're sitting here, then my story isn't. Keep watching the sunsets for me, Ben. Tell the world about curiosity, about kindness, about how one small choice can change a life. And when you look at the mountains, remember, home isn't a place. It's a feeling you share." I closed the book and stared at the horizon. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in the same colors Michael once loved. I whispered, "Thank you," and the wind seemed to carry it away. For a while, I sat there in silence. Then I lifted the camera, the one Thomas had given me, and took a picture. The light was perfect, soft, warm, endless. It felt like they were both still there, watching with me. That night, I went home and printed the photo. I framed it and placed it beside the letter and journal on my shelf. It wasn't just a picture. It was a story of 3 lives woven together by something invisible yet strong. Months passed. I kept visiting the overlook every Saturday, just like before. Sometimes Gabby joined me, sometimes I went alone. I kept taking photos, kept writing small notes in Thomas's journal. The ache of loss never disappeared, but it changed shape. It became something gentler, something that reminded me to appreciate everything I had. One morning, while editing photos, I noticed how much my work had improved. The local gallery announced a photography contest, and Gabby convinced me to enter. "Thomas would have wanted you to," she said. So, I did. I submitted a photo titled "Home." It was that last picture of the overlook, the one I'd taken after reading his final words. Weeks later, I got an email. The subject line said, "Congratulations. My photo had won 3rd place in a regional exhibition." I stared at the screen, smiling and crying at the same time. I thought about Thomas, about how proud he would have been. The awards ceremony was held at a small art center downtown. Gabby came with me. When the announcer called my name, I walked to the stage feeling shaky but proud. As I accepted the certificate, I looked at the framed photo behind me on display. The caption read, "Sometimes home isn't where you live. It's where you find yourself." The audience clapped softly, and for a moment, I felt completely alive. Afterward, Gabby hugged me and said, "See? You followed curiosity, and it led you here." I smiled. It led me to everything. That night, we drove to the overlook again, the two of us sitting in the same place where I once met a stranger who became family. The sky was clear, the stars endless. I pulled out the camera and took another picture, our silhouettes against the starlight. Gabby leaned her head on my shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. I looked out at the horizon and whispered, that maybe this story still isn't over. She smiled. "Then let's see where it goes." We sat in silence, listening to the wind, and I felt that familiar spark again, the quiet call of curiosity leading me towards something new. And just when I thought life had finally found its rhythm, a letter arrived in the mail with handwriting I didn't recognize, a name I hadn't heard before, and words that would once again change everything. The envelope was small and pale yellow, the kind people use for personal letters rather than bills. When I first saw it in my mailbox, my stomach tightened. The handwriting was careful, almost delicate, the kind that belongs to someone who still believes in taking their time. It was addressed to me, Ben Turner, and below that, a faint return name, Eleanor Carver. For a moment I couldn't move. The name hit me like a memory I hadn't made yet. Carver. The same last name as Thomas and Michael. My hands shook as I turned the envelope over and opened it. Inside was a single folded page and a small photograph. The photo showed a young woman standing beside a boy who looked about 12, both smiling at the camera. The boy was Michael. The woman must have been his mother. I stared at it for a long moment before unfolding the page. "Dear Ben," it began, "I'm Eleanor Carver. I'm Thomas's sister, Michael's aunt. I don't know if we've ever met, but Thomas wrote about you often. He called you his Saturday friend. He said you reminded him of hope. When he passed, I found a stack of letters in his desk addressed to people who changed his life. Yours was the only one unfinished. He left a note saying, Ben already knows what I'd say, but maybe he needs to hear it one more time. I hope it's all right that I'm writing to you now." I had to sit down. The page trembled slightly in my hands. I took a breath and kept reading. "Thomas told me everything about how you found him through Michael's car, about how the three of you would watch the sunset together. He said those Saturdays healed something inside him. I want you to know you did the same for me, even though we never met." When he talked about you, his voice sounded lighter. He said, "The boy who followed curiosity gave me back my reason to smile. Thank you for being there for him when I couldn't." My eyes filled again. I hadn't expected another letter to feel like this, so full of kindness and loss at the same time. The words blurred, but I kept reading. "Thomas asked me to send you something," it continued. "He called it his final promise. In the box with this letter you'll find an old film roll. It's from Michael's camera, one he never developed. Thomas believed whoever found him would know what to do with it. Maybe it belongs with you now." I looked into the envelope and, sure enough, a tiny black roll of undeveloped film slid out. My heart raced. I hadn't seen real film in years. I turned it over in my fingers, wondering what kind of images were sleeping inside it. I took the rest of the day off work and drove straight to a small photography shop downtown. The man behind the counter, gray-haired and gentle, smiled when he saw the film. "Old Kodak," he said. "You don't see many of these anymore. I can develop it, but it'll take a few hours." I left the roll with him and wandered around town, trying to calm my thoughts. Every step felt like part of a circle closing, like the story was looping back to where it started, but with me finally awake inside it. When I returned that afternoon, the man handed me a small envelope. "Whoever took these," he said softly, "had an eye for moments that mattered." I opened it right there at the counter. There were 7 photographs. The first few were mountains, trees, rivers, shots full of color and motion. But the last one made my knees weak. It was the overlook. The same bench. Only this time, the picture showed Thomas and a much younger Michael sitting side by side, watching a sunset identical to the one I'd captured a year earlier. It looked like time folding in on itself. I felt tears spill before I could stop them. The old man behind the counter put a hand on my shoulder. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I nodded, unable to speak. I bought a frame on the way home and placed the photograph on my shelf next to the others, the letter, the journal, the camera. The 3 generations of the Carvers now lived quietly on that wooden surface, their story still breathing through me. That night I showed the picture to Gabby. She stared at it for a long time, tracing the edges with her fingertips. "It's like they were waiting for you," she said softly. "Maybe that's why the film was never developed." I didn't answer, because deep down I knew she was right. Some moments are meant to wait until the right person is ready to see them. We decided to visit the overlook the next morning. The sun rose clear and bright. The world smelled like pine and promise. I brought the framed photograph with me and placed it on the bench between us. "They belong here," I said. Gabby nodded. We sat for hours, watching the sky change colors. A hawk circled overhead, and for a second it felt like a sign, one last hello from the people who'd taught me how to live. As the days turned into weeks, I started planning a small photography exhibition of my own. Not for awards or recognition, but as a way to share the story. I called it Following Home. Each photo told a piece of it: the empty highway, the foggy mornings, Thomas's smile, Gabby's laughter, the bench at sunset. The centerpiece was Michael's last photo, the one of him and Thomas together. On opening night, the gallery lights were soft and golden. People moved quietly, whispering to each other. Some cried, some smiled. I stood in the corner, listening to them talk about curiosity, about connection, about how simple things can change everything. A woman in her 60s came up to me, tears shining in her eyes. "Your pictures remind me of my husband," she said. "He used to say the same thing: follow what makes you curious." I smiled gently. "Then he understood," I said. "That's what these are about." When the evening ended, I stayed behind after everyone left. I turned off the lights and stood alone in the quiet room. The photographs glowed faintly under the exit sign. I whispered, "We did it, Thomas. We finished the story." A soft breeze from the open door brushed my face, and I swear it felt like an answer. Life after that moved forward in small, beautiful ways. The bookstore promoted me to manager. Gabby and I moved into a little house near the edge of town. We planted wildflowers in the backyard. Sometimes, on clear nights, we'd spread a blanket outside and look up at the stars. She'd rest her head on my shoulder and ask, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you deleted that address?" Every time, I'd smile and say, "All the time." And every time, I'm grateful I didn't. Years passed like pages turning quietly. The Civic finally grew old, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it. It stayed parked under a tree, a little rust on the edges, still carrying the same saved address labeled home. One evening, I was cleaning the car when a neighborhood kid, maybe 17, walked by and asked, "Hey mister, does that thing still run?" I laughed. "Barely." He looked curious, eyes bright in the setting sun. "Cool. It looks like it has stories." I smiled, feeling a familiar spark of recognition. "Oh, it does," I said. "More than you can imagine." He grinned. "Maybe one day you'll tell me." I hesitated, thinking of Michael, of Thomas, of how curiosity started everything. "Maybe," I said. "But for now, tell me something, are you curious?" He nodded instantly. "Always." I looked at the car, at the worn GPS screen still holding that one old address, and an idea flickered in my mind. That night, I sat inside the car and turned on the GPS. The display glowed softly. I deleted all other data except that one word, home. Then I added a note under it, just 3 simple words: follow your curiosity. I smiled, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the night. The car sat silent, patient, waiting, like it had before me, like it would for someone else someday. I didn't know who would own it next, or when, but I knew it would happen. That's how stories like this work. They don't end, they travel. The next morning, I told Gabby what I'd done. She looked at me for a long second, then smiled. "So, you're passing it on?" "Yeah," I said. "It's time." We took one last drive together up the mountain. The sun was bright, the valley alive with color. At the overlook, we sat on the bench holding hands, the framed photo beside us. "This is where it started," she whispered. "And maybe where it starts again," I said. I turned to her. "When we're gone, I want someone else to find this place. To sit here. To feel what we felt." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Then we'll leave it ready for them." We buried a small box beneath the bench that day. Inside it, we placed copies of both letters, one of my photographs, and a note that simply said, "If you're here, you were meant to be. Follow your curiosity." The wind picked up as we covered it with soil, scattering pine needles across the ground. It felt right. We stayed until the sun set and the world turned golden one last time. I took a final picture, our shadows stretching long across the wood, the light wrapping around us like a goodbye. Years later, when I was old and my hair had gone silver, I drove back alone. Gabby had passed the year before, peacefully in her sleep. The road looked the same, but the world felt quieter. I sat on the bench, camera in hand, and whispered, "I kept my promise." The mountains didn't answer, but the wind did, soft and warm. I looked at the horizon and saw a car pull into the lot below. A young woman stepped out, holding a phone, squinting at the GPS. She looked around, confused but curious. My heart lifted. I smiled. "You came," I whispered, "just like Thomas once said to me." And as the sun dipped behind the hills, I understood what Michael had meant all those years ago: there really is no right path. There's only the one you follow with an open heart. The story that started with a dying man's hope had become a living circle, still turning, still calling, still whispering to anyone who listens, "Follow your curiosity. It will always lead you home." If you're watching till this moment, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that small choices can change everything. Stay curious. Stay kind. And I'll see you in the next story.